Before today's episode gets started, a huge thank you to Andrew, my Discord community moderator, for sharing this with me. With Valentine's Day just around the corner, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital just launched a really meaningful initiative. In the description below, you'll find a link to their website where you can send a free Valentine's Day card to St. Jude kids. To start, you simply choose whichever artwork that you want on the card. Being a huge fan of Magic, I chose this one. Then you can either type out your own message or select one of the pre-written messages that they have for you. Then you simply send the card and you really have made someone's day. Again, this is something that you can do for free and it takes less than a minute of your time, but it can have a huge impact on the kids over at St. Jude. So I hope that you can take a moment of your time to really brighten someone's day. Thank you in advance for doing this, and again, a huge thank you to Andrew for bringing this to my attention. Thank you all for your time, and now let's jump back into the episode. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Core studio. Welcome to the show. So today's deck tech comes to you courtesy of Mike, who's been supporting this channel as a Golden Pig tier patron, and I truly couldn't do this without amazing patrons like Mike, so Mike, thank you so much. For the personalized deck tech, Mike chose a partner deck with Eligeth and Kydele. The deck's going to focus on turning Scry into draw using the extra draws to power up Kydele's ability to help cast big splashy spells. Let's jump into Eligeth first, a 5/6 Sphinx with flying that costs 4 blue. He has, if you would scry a number of cards, draw that many cards instead. So my usual saying is that Scry isn't card advantage, it's card selection, but in this case, it is card advantage. There are a ton of cheap ways to scry a lot of cards, and Eligeth makes the most of all of them by letting us draw instead. And then Kydele, chosen of Kerfix, is a 2/3 human wizard that costs 2 green-blue. She has tap, add colors to your mana pool for each card you've drawn this turn. So by scrying a lot, we draw a ton of cards, and that fuels Kydele and lets us make a ton of mana. We can easily produce upwards of 10 mana in a turn with Kydele. And from there, there's plenty of ways to win. Now, in this deck tech, I'm going to be delving into many of the unique cards for this deck. But when it comes to the more standard cards for this deck, make sure you check out my deck building guide on Simic Commanders. For example, many of these standard ramp spells, removal spells, and even lands for Simic can be found here. But with all that said, let's jump into some of the exciting cards that work really well with this deck. So when it comes to scrying, you've got a lot of incredibly efficient options like Fairy Seer, Preordain, and Reason. Most of the time, if you're paying 1 mana, the most cards that you can draw is basically just 1. But you can scry a lot more for just 1 mana, and Eligeth again turns that into card draw. So instead of Fairy Seer scrying 2, you're going to be drawing 2 cards. And then Preordain says scry 2 then draw a card, but this is just basically draw 3 cards. Reason lets you basically do the same, allowing you to scry 3, which again is draw 3, and so yeah, both of these cards are now essentially Ancestral Recall. Okay, except for the fact that that's an instant. Yeah, there's a reason that's banned. Anyways, moving forward, Augriel is also going to let you draw 3 when it comes into play. And then Deliberate will let you draw 3 at instant speed for 2 mana. Omen of the Sea has Flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you scry 2, then you draw a card, and you can also sacrifice it to scry 2 again. So essentially, the first time you get to draw 3 for 2 mana, and then you pay 3 to draw 2. Next up is the very weird but very awesome Cryptic Annelid. When it comes into play, you scry 1, then you scry 2, and then you scry 3. So essentially, draw 6. Speaking of draw 6, there's Tamiyo's Epiphany, which says scry 4, then draw 2. For 4 mana, drawing 6 is a really good deal. But not quite as good of a deal as Ugin's Insight, which lets you scry X, where X is the highest converted mana cost among permanents you control, then you draw 3 cards. So with Eligeth in play, that's going to be scry 6, then draw 3, so draw 9 total. And drawing 9 cards for 5 mana is absolutely absurd, and keep in mind that again, this all just fuels Kydele. We're also going to be running plenty of cards that do something outside of drawing and scrying, like Dissolve and Condescend. These are both essentially just counter spells that also happen to scry. Dissolve is an instant for 1 blue, and it says counter target spell, scry 1. So again, with Eligeth in play, this is basically counter spell, draw a card, which is fantastic for 3 mana. And then Condescend can be even better. It's an instant for X and a blue, and it says counter target spell lets its controller pays X, scry 2. So if we've got the mana for it, we can use it to help counter a spell, or we can even just use this as a very effective cantrip. You actually don't have to put anything into that X. You can just say, hey, do you want that spell countered unless you pay 0? No? Okay, well, I'm just going to draw 2 cards anyways. Another example of a great utility scry spell is Inscription of Insight. It's a source for 3 and a blue, and it has kicker 2 blue, and it says choose 1. If this spell is kicked, choose any number instead. Return up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hands, scry 2, then draw 2. Target player creates an XX blue illusion creature token where X is the number of cards in their hand. So this can bounce some creatures, this can draw some cards, or it can make us a huge illusion. so this can be effective in a lot of situations for us. But now it's time for us to talk about some repeatable scry effects like Sigiled Starfish and Eyes Everywhere. Sigiled Starfish is a very simple creature, it's just a 0/3 starfish that costs 1 and a blue and you can tap it to scry 1. Also, quick note, I didn't realize that a starfish was actually a creature type until I saw this. Yeah, I'm just as surprised as you, and actually I just looked it up, and fun fact, there's only 2 starfishes in the history of Magic. But that's enough starfish trivia for today, and back to the matter at hand, this is basically tap draw 1. For 2 mana, a repeatable draw effect like this is fantastic. And then Eyes Everywhere is an enchantment that costs 2 and a blue, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. You can also pay mana to exchange that, but you're basically not going to want to do that because this is a 3 mana during your upkeep draw. So for Phyrexian Arena, eat your heart out. Now there are repeatable effects on cards like Crystal Ball that you gotta pay for, but it's gonna be well worth it. It's an artifact for 3 and you pay 1 to tap it and scry 2. 1 mana, tap, draw 2 cards, yes, sign me up. We've also got some conditional scry effects as well, like Eyes of the Watcher and Jace's Sanctum. Eyes of the Watcher says whenever you play an instant or sorcery spell, you may pay 1, if you do, scry 2. We've got a ton of instants and sorceries in this deck, and now just by paying 1 extra, we're drawing 2 more cards. And then Jace's Sanctum actually kind of has the opposite effect, making our spells cheaper. It says instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, scry 1. So mana reduction and card advantage on all of our instants and sorceries, yeah, that's going to be a good include in the deck. And speaking of conditional scry, we've got Prognostic Sphinx, which has whenever it attacks, scry 3. And we can also protect it by discarding a card and giving it hexproof until end of turn, but we do have to tap it. But a protected source of massive card draw like this can be fantastic in this deck. But perhaps the biggest scry effect that we have comes with Jace Mirror Mage. Jace starts off at 4 loyalty and costs 1 blue, but it also has kicker 2. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, we create a token that's a copy of it, but it's not legendary and its starting loyalty is 1. Its +1 is scry 2, and its 0 is draw a card and reveal it, remove a number of loyalty counters equal to that card's converted mana cost from Jace Mirror Mage. Essentially, we're never going to use that 0 as long as Eligeth's in play because this is basically +1, draw 2. And again, if we kicked it, we get 2 of those, and so we're basically just drawing 4 each turn from this. Again, there are a lot of repeatable scry effects that let us draw a ton of cards and fuel Kydele each turn. But we've got cards like Yora's Follower that can make Kydele even more effective. It's a 2/2 Merfolk for a green and a blue, and it has tap, untap another target permanent. So early on, this can be great turn 2 ramp, untapping one of our lands, but later on, we're definitely going to be using this to untap Kydele. This on its own essentially doubles up the effectiveness of Kydele. So we're going to be running other untap effects like Retreat to Coral Helm and Murkfiend Liege. Retreat to Coral Helm is an enchantment that costs 2 and a blue, and it has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1. You may tap or untap target creature or scry 1. So this can help us out in multiple ways, either untapping Kydele or helping us draw. And then Murkfiend Liege gives our other green and blue creatures +1/+1. It also lets us untap our green and blue creatures we control during each other player's untap step. So if we've got some instant speed spells, we can utilize Kydele on multiple turns. But the best untap effect for this deck has got to be the Golden Pig, which is our #1 card out of our 99, and that's Chalkum Retriever. Chalkum Retriever is a 2/4 Elemental Hound for 4 and a blue, and it says whenever you cast a spell during your turn, untap target creature. So we tap Kydele for a lot of mana, we use that mana to cast some big scry spells, we draw more cards, we untap Kydele, we tap her again, and you see where this is going. Now obviously we are somewhat limited because Kydele only produces colorless mana. But still, there are a ton of ways that we can really utilize the colorless mana that she can produce. So with this in play, we can cast an absurd amount of spells into the turn and get really far ahead of our opponents, and that's why it's the Golden Pig. We can also dump that mana into some huge ramp spells like Animus Awakening and Kamal's Druidic Vow. Animus Awakening says really top X cards of your library, put all land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest and bottom of your library in a random order. On top of that, it's got Spell Mastery, so if we've got 2 or more instant and/or sorcery cards in our graveyard, we untap those lands. And then Kamal's Druidic Vow is a legendary sorcery that costs X green and says look at the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of land and/or legendary permanent cards with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest in your graveyard. So both of these can be massive ram spells that get lands into play untapped. So we can get really far ahead of our opponents and utilize that mana in the same turn. But another way to really help us utilize our mana is with something like Horizon Stone. It's an artifact for 5, and it says if you lose unspent mana, that mana becomes colorless instead. So we can essentially bank our mana with Kydele and save it for an even bigger spell. But now let's talk about some ways to actually finish out the game, starting with Nadir Kraken, Omniseas, and Jolreal. Nadir Kraken just starts off as a 2/3, but it's going to get a lot bigger because it says whenever you draw a card, you may pay 1. If you do, put a ++1 counter on it and create a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token. So Nadir Kraken can not only become a huge threat, but makes a giant army. It really helps us utilize and take advantage of all of our card draws, and so does Omniseas. Whenever we draw a card, we get a counter on it, and then we can remove 8 of those counters to create an 8/8 blue Kraken. So essentially, for every 8 cards we draw, we get a giant creature. And then Jolreal can help us out in multiple ways. It says whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 2/2 green cat creature token. She also has play 4 green until end of turn. Creatures you control have base power and toughness XX for X the number of cards in your hand. So Jolreal can not only help us create tokens, but she can also make our entire army massive. Again, with the number of cards that we can draw in a turn, we can easily turn our commander into a one-shot kill with just this. We can also utilize our opponent's things though with something like Mass Manipulation. It's a sorcerer that costs XX, blue, and it says gain control of X target creatures and/or planeswalkers. Again, with the amount of mana that Kydele can make for us in a turn, we can easily put a ton of mana into this X and gain control of a lot of powerful things. We can utilize our card draw in a different way though with something like Psychosis Crawler. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in our hand, and whenever we draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. So not only is this going to be a huge threat, but it can also drain out our opponents very quickly. And speaking of hand size, we've got even more ways to take advantage of that with things like Body of Knowledge and Imperial Plate. Body of Knowledge's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in our hand. We have no maximum hand size, and whenever it's dealt damage, we draw that many cards. Not having to discard down is going to be huge for this deck. So this can be a giant threat that just makes our hand even bigger. And then something like Imperial Plate can easily make our commander into a one-shot kill, giving it +1/+1 for each card in our hand. And because Eligeth already has flying, it's going to be pretty easy to get through on most opponents. Again, the combination of Eligeth and Kydele can be incredibly powerful and deadly. With the efficient scry effects that you have, you can easily draw a ton of cards in a turn, pump a lot of mana out with Kydele, and then cast some really big and splashy spells. If you're looking to play this deck, consider joining the amazing PlayEDH Discord. It's a great way to play Commander over webcam. In the description below, you'll find their Discord invite link, as well as the tier that this deck has been approved at next to the deck list. So if you want to pick it up and play it as is, you can, and be sure to read their welcome information for more details. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.